Hi, I am M. Roblin. I am about helping you seek out your potential, awaken to new possibilities, zoom up, out from those problems, get a fresh perspective. Let's keep talking about calling it out, calling out behavior that is not constructive or additive to building that inclusive culture that's really important. Let me ask you, when was the last time you were called out? Like, when was the last time? What was the context? Were you in a meeting? Was it one-to-one? Just think about it. Yeah, I'm thinking about this and I'm framing this and I want to have this conversation because I really appreciate the comments coming in from the previous videos on this series. If you haven't seen those, I encourage you to go back and watch them. We dug into a specific example and what that looks like. But what I really want to honor and appreciate is somebody who shared, well, Em, your feedback, your response to that person who got called out, like, wow, it's so different than how I would have handled it. And it just even thinking about being called out in that way makes me feel really uncomfortable. Like, it's so awkward and uncomfortable. And, first of all, I just want to appreciate you for recognizing and noticing that being called out can be really uncomfortable when we're not aware, right? When our intention doesn't match up with our behavior, that's a blind spot, and it can be really shocking and upsetting to discover that something we've done unintentionally has hurt somebody else. Yeah, I get the discomfort, and I want to encourage you to lean in and think about this in a totally different way, which is, what's the cost? What's at risk if you're not being called out? If you're not being called out and you haven't been called out recently, well, that means your blind spots are going unchecked. Because wait a second, we all have them. We all have biases. And just because nobody's called you out recently, it doesn't mean you're a perfectly inclusive leader. I have to say, this is a conversation I have over and over again with leaders who are like, inclusive leader, you can't get more inclusive than me. Anybody can approach me at any time they like. And it's like, yeah, I get your intention is to be inclusive, but I want you to just tell me who's actually called you out and when and what was it for? And it's like, oh, yeah, I haven't really had those. Just because you haven't had those those moments of being called out doesn't mean that they're not there. There could be a couple reasons. Number one, are you operating in an echo chamber? In other words, are the people that you're working with actually quite similar to you? And so you actually have many collectively shared blind spots. And so in a different settings, maybe your behavior actually would be quite inappropriate, but nobody really notices it and it kind of goes unchecked. So you might not get called out in a scenario where you're actually very homogeneous, or you're kind of in an echo chamber and people share the same perspectives and kind of knowledge and background. The other scenario I invite you to consider is that you actually are operating in a diverse environment with people that have different experiences and come from different backgrounds, but they're just not comfortable to tell you. Maybe you're saying things that aren't really landing well with people, but instead of approaching you about it, they're more just suppressing it. They're hanging on to it. They're telling themselves it's not a big deal, and they're moving through, and they're continuing on, but they're not letting you know. Yeah, if that's the case, that's much more about a lack of psychological safety. People don't feel safe. They feel there's a risk in bringing that to your attention. So you need to ask yourself really critically, like, do I truly have a psychologically safe environment? Just because I feel psychologically safe, just because I feel comfortable as a leader to share whatever is on my mind, doesn't mean that that's showing up for everybody else. It's a really great thing to start to inquire about in your team. Do people feel comfortable? What's at risk? What's at stake? Because here's the thing, if we're really building an inclusive environment, well, that learning mindset, that learning agility, it's got to be central to the culture of inclusion, right? It's got to be like really, really core. We're all learning. And if we're not getting that kind of feedback where people aren't helping us uncover our blind spots, we're actually limiting our own growth, but we're limiting everybody else's too. Yeah. Look, I'm inspired by a lot of the comments I'm getting on this series, so thank you. Something I really loved that came out of the discussion, when I had set up this series, I was thinking about it more around taking up what's often seen as a practical tool, and honoring the subjective, the culturally loaded, the complexity of it, the relational aspect to it, and looking at some cases. But what I also see coming out is how people are appreciating just having some space and time to say, well, in a real case, I might just get really triggered. I might just get really defensive or emotional, and having some time and space to think about it and get some different feedback might actually prepare me differently. So I like that. And it's inspired me next to look at calling it out. So if you're the person that somebody else has a behavior and it lands with you, how do you do it? And also being a bystander. So those will be the next 2 videos coming. And please keep those comments coming. Really love them. What are you reacting to? What's landing? What isn't? What questions do you have? What experiences would you like to share? I am here and I am listening.